Democratic Congressman Tom Malinowski. Welcome back to the show, Congressman.
Thanks, Alex. Good to see you.
I wanted to start with H.R. 1. Why do you think this law is necessary now?
So here's basically what H.R. 1 does. It makes it easier for Americans to vote, and it makes it harder for billionaires to buy our elections. I think most Americans would support both of those goals. We saw what it meant last November to make it easier to vote. We had measures in New Jersey and all across this country to allow vote by mail and early voting and drop boxes. I used a drop box to vote in Flemington, New Jersey, to make it easier for folks to register to vote. And what H.R. 1 would do is basically to create a national standard to allow people all across the country to continue to vote in ways that actually work with our modern lives and our modern schedules. Good high turnout is good, and it's something that Republicans and Democrats should support. It doesn't actually favor one side over the other, as we have seen in election around the country. It just makes our democracy stronger.
But see, when I pull back from this issue and look, you talk about high turnout. Doesn't it seem, though, that the Democrats want high turnout and the counterweight is the Republican voter ID bills? Aren't both parties simply trying to tilt the playing field to their own advantage?
Well, of course, every party wants to win. And I think there is conventional wisdom out there that high turnout favors Democrats. If that's true, I think it would still be wrong to try to diminish turnout. I think most Americans would agree that our democracy is stronger when more people vote. But in reality, I just don't think that's the case. I think in my district, for example, in northwestern New Jersey, high turnout probably favors Republicans more than Democrats. The important thing is, why would anybody want to make it harder for Americans to exercise this basic franchise? In states like Texas and Georgia, Republicans are trying to make it harder, and they say they're doing it because of voter fraud, but there's no evidence of voter fraud in those states. What it seems to me that they're trying to do is counter a situation they faced in 2020 when, from their point of view, the wrong people were voting. Too many young people, too many people of color, too many people who historically have not turned out to the polls. And that's just not an appropriate motivation for voter suppression.
I wanted to turn to the ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline. You were among members of Congress who received a briefing from cabinet members from the Biden cabinet this past week. What do we know about the ransomware attack right now?
It was extremely serious in the sense that it reminds us just how vulnerable these critical systems that deliver our energy to our homes are. Whether it's nuclear power plants or the distribution system for gasoline, which is what was hit in this case, our electrical grid. We absolutely have to make sure that these critical systems are secure. This attack was not as terrible as it might have been. Some of the lines that we saw for gas in some states around the country were almost entirely due to hoarding, not because of the limitations created by the hack. That's one thing we learned from this briefing and what we're hearing from the governors of all those states. Number two, I think we've also recently learned that one reason for the shortages apparently is that this company, this pipeline company, actually decided to cut off the supply because it was worried that it couldn't bill its customers. If that's true, I'm pretty pissed off. That is not an appropriate response. And then finally, we got to deal with the fact that these hackers are in another country. They're in Russia. President Biden has said thus far, we don't have evidence that the Russian government was behind it. I think that's a distinction without much of a difference. I think we need new rules on the international stage that say you cannot provide safe haven for these kinds of hacking groups. If they're operating on your territory, you have a responsibility to shut them down. And if you don't, then we hold you, the Russian government, accountable.
That would almost be a new doctrine, though, for U.S. foreign policy, would it not?
Actually, yes. Consistent with the doctrine that led us to create NATO. You know, when we were worried about a physical attack by armed force from our adversaries. This is also an attack. And if it's not the Russian government, if it's in effect like a terrorist group operating from Russian soil, then the Russian government still has a responsibility to deal with it. And I think that's a principle that we need to establish in our foreign policy.
I have to ask you about the state and local tax deduction. You and New Jersey's congressional delegation have been very, very vocal about getting that restored. I have to ask you point blank, for real, if you don't get the tax deduction fully restored, will you vote against President Biden's infrastructure bill?
So there isn't an infrastructure bill yet. We're writing it ourselves. President Biden has proposed a framework, a set of ideas to us. The infrastructure and jobs package, we believe, has to be paid for, right? So we're talking about different ways through IRS tax enforcement to making corporations like Amazon actually pay taxes and potentially increases in the top individual rate for taxpayers to pay for some of the things that President Biden wants us to do. Here's what I've said, very, very clear. I will not support legislation that has a meaningful tax impact on my constituents, that raises their taxes, their individual taxes, unless it addresses the SALT issue. That's the bottom line. I'm not turning down the Gateway Tunnel, right? If we get a bill that builds the infrastructure that we need in New Jersey, I'm not turning down the infrastructure. But if we're dealing with tax increases, tax adjustments to pay for infrastructure, it's got to address the SALT issue for my middle-class constituents that were hit hard in 2017.
All right, Congressman Tom Malinowski, Democrat of the 7th District, thanks as always for joining us.